So briefly, four things. We're going to talk about caring, and we've heard that so much today and the days before, but then move on to how this interpersonal caring was developed, and importantly, a scholarly point, how it was empirically tested. Did it hold up to real life application? And then how can we apply it as a Christian nurse? Next, please. So I have on here English, but also some Chinese words for our audience members who might be here from Taiwan or such. I hope it's correct. Roach talked about the attributes of caring, and we know that caring is such a basic part of what we do as nurses. She notes that true caring encompasses compassion, competence, confidence, conscience, and commitment. And you can think about a mother caring for a very, very young newborn or an infant, and how that picture itself amplifies caring. Next, please. Yes, so you can think of it as a step, starting from the very bottom, compassion, which we all know is based on love. And true compassion can only be received and found through God, right? Next, please. Without the first step of compassion, next, please. Maybe it's a little bit slow. Thank you. So it's the world's greatest energy source. Next, please. And it's a sensitivity to the pain and brokenness of the other person. Without compassion, next, please. Thank you. Competence itself can be even brutal. It can be like a weapon. It can be inhumane. And we know that nursing practice requires of us a very high degree of competence, not just intellectually, but also emotionally and affective, technical, and administrative responsibilities and skills. Next, please. So after compassion and then competence, we will be able to gain confidence of what we can do faithfully and worthy of other people's trust. Nurses are able to create trusting relationships with confidence. Next, please. And then finally, we have conscience and confidence, which are on top of each other. And the conscience is, we know ICN, the Code of Ethics, challenges us to provide committed and conscientious care to our patients and the clients that we meet. And commitment is an act that calls us to a willing and conscious and positive course of action. So then at the very bottom, as Christian nurses, how can we emulate those attributes of caring? And here I just want to take you a few minutes with the person next to you and ask yourselves, of these 5 components of caring, which do you feel most challenged in this conference today? Maybe you can just exchange a few words to the person next to you, if one speaks out to you, out of compassion, competence, confidence, conscience, and commitment. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to share. Our conference theme, Strength and Courage to Care, I think speaks equally to all of these components, and I hope you can take things away from the overall conference. Next, please. So within this idea of caring and the 5 components, Dr. Susie Kim really, she had an intersection of a caring encounter, and I'll explain it in a minute, but she had a very powerful encounter with a patient, and that made her inquire what to do next. How can she step up those steps of caring and integrating her faith within it? So Peplau's interpersonal relations may sound familiar in the theme and the name of this theory, interpersonal caring. While Peplau talked about person-to-person relationships as leading us to healing and care, she didn't really mention how. She didn't give us the building blocks of how we can establish that relationship. And so Susie Kim was interested in identifying the building blocks. One day, she's a psychiatric nurse. She was teaching at a university. And one day, it was a Saturday, and she happened to be at school working. And there was a loud commotion outside, and a young man in his 20s, obviously very distressed, was having a struggle with the security person of the university building. And it turned out he was a schizophrenic young man. He had been newly discharged from the hospital, but had nowhere to go to talk about his struggles coming back to the community. And that was 1984, and she asked him, she invited him in, she gave him something to drink, and they started talking. And she listened to him talk and talk and talk. And then finally he said, I think I'm ready to leave. And so then she said, if you feel like talking, you can come back next week, and you can bring your friends. Do you think he came back? Yes, he came back with 4 friends. The next week, he came back with 13 friends. And so it became a huge group immediately. And Susie Kim, she met with this little group over time. Every Saturday, she would take her time and meet with them. And eventually, it led to a grounded theory study, a qualitative study, hearing their stories. And she asked them, would you share your experience of living as a mentally ill person? Of course, they were talking and talking, right? But then it led to a descriptive study of when they felt they were truly cared for. And she identified 198 descriptions, that's a lot. And then with qualitative data analysis, she categorized those into more than 10 concepts, but then through principal component analysis, boiling it down with 50 patients into 10 concepts. Next, please. So just to give you a brief snapshot of what she did and who she was the first PhD in nursing in Korea, and she trained in the US. She came back to Korea, she established a lot of graduate studies and the first doctoral program here. So she spearheaded a lot of things. She was one of the early members of Korea's NCF meeting, and eventually president too of NCF. During her professorship at Ewha, that's when she met with the people with severe mental illness and ultimately developed the interpersonal caring theory that I'm sharing with you today. From that, the Florence Nightingale International Foundation recognized her work, and she was fortunate to be selected as the 2001 for the International Achievement Award. And later on, after her retirement, she spent 4 years in Lilongwe, Malawi, doing what she knows best, because she was a teacher for most of her career. So she served as Dean of Daeang College of Nursing, which still continues. Next, please. So it's a very colorful depiction, but we start at the top. We start at 12 o'clock, and it starts with noticing. And then the other 9 components, you can mix and go whichever direction is necessary. But really, it's the interpersonal behavior of noticing that Susie Kim emphasized the most. And when we give talks like this, my colleagues and I, or people, we hold small workshops too, and people always comment, they tend to comment that noticing is the one that stands out to them immediately. The other concepts they're very familiar with in nursing, in their training, or just intuitively. But I think noticing is one thing that they really appreciated. Next, please. So before I explain each concept, I want to just briefly introduce the empirical testing. I mean, the 10 concepts are a lot. I would rather have it boiled down to 5 or more, put it in your pocket, but 10 is a lot. But were they useful? Did they help? Is a question that comes to our mind, right? The United Nations Development Program, the UNDP project, offered the opportunity to test this empirically. So as a background, I want to share that there were no nurse practitioner programs in psychiatric mental health before that. But when she was a professor at Ewha, Susie Kim started the first psychiatric nurse practitioner training program in 1991. And at that time, they sent 20 psychiatric NPs to visit the homes of people discharged with serious mental illnesses at psychiatric sanatoriums from one small area of Seoul. And that was the summer of '95. And they found 204 long-term patients under the radar, not being caught by the government for any kind of care, and they were just basically left without any treatment. So she strongly felt that this was an area that could be adaptable for applying the interpersonal caring. And fortuitously, the Mental Health Act passed for the first time in Korea in the same year, December. So that meant that now the government was recognizing mental health was very important in the community, not just locking people up in the wards, right? So recognizing that, they were committing to put more money into community mental health centers. So that was another blessing on top of what she was trying to do. Next, please. So the UNDP project ran from August of 96 to July of 98. And actually, before she did this, she wanted to test this as a small pilot program. Susie Kim was an academic. She was an academic and a clinical nurse, but she didn't have really skills in terms of lobbying for money or meeting people in power. I don't think many of us are comfortable in that area. Although Benson earlier, he challenged us with political awareness and more activity, right? But for her pilot project, she was knocking on doors of companies, and she asked for a very small amount after getting a meeting with the CEO after a long struggle. He looked at her. He had heard the project, and he looked at her and said, "It sounds like an important project. Why are you asking for so small amount of money?" And he ended up giving her 10 times more. So with that, she was able to start the pilot. And then with that pilot under her belt, she was able to go to the UNDP and apply officially for UNDP funding. So I think it's just encouraging for all of us to think about what are the steps that are needed. We don't need to constantly worry about our barriers. Sometimes just taking that first step can be a big boost and will lead us into the direction. So with $300,000 US dollars, she was able to do this project for 2 years. It was the first nurse-initiated and nurse-managed community mental health community center project. And the aims were to break the vicious cycle of hospitalized, being discharged, your illness getting worse and being readmitted, to help patients to establish meaningful relationships with family, to facilitate psychosocial functions, and to strengthen and support to them to live an integrated life overall. Next, please. And this was basically the conceptual model that was in her mind. If you provide interpersonal caring, it will boost people's self-esteem, and that will enable interpersonal relationships, daily living skills, self-care, and social functioning, which can ultimately lead to quality of life. And as we all know, it's not just the patient who needs the care, it's the family members too. Next, please. So these were the services provided. First of all, daycare and home care-based services, a mixture according to that area and what they wanted. Daycare programs and home visit services within 4 different sites, which included the Seongbukgu area that I mentioned earlier, where they had found so many uncared for, under the radar psychiatric patients. And basically from 3 to 6, it's educational programs for family and education and training to support patients, volunteers, and professionals. Next, please. So what did they do for home visits? First of all, they do individual assessments of all of these areas, and you can see it's not just education and teaching, it's connecting them with available resources and also intervening in terms of crisis. Next, please. For family, it was mostly education so that they could understand their loved one who had the serious mental illness. What does that mean? How does medication help? Do we still need stress and coping? Of course. And how can they effectively communicate and symptom manage so that they don't fall into crisis moments? Next, please. For volunteers, they had many volunteers, especially from the church groups that were in the area. And they had a total of 58 sessions with university students, lay people in the public, family members, and also sometimes patients were volunteers themselves. And then for healthcare professionals, PSR, or psychosocial rehabilitation, was the basis for training and education of volunteers and professionals. So these were hospital nurses, public health trained and mental health trained nurse practitioners, school-based nurses, community center nurses. So 22 times they were able to have those sessions. Next, please. So that intervention was delivered through a quasi-experimental study, the ICT, or the Interpersonal Caring Technique Group, consisting of patients and family, and then the non-ICT. So basically the top two groups were using psychosocial rehabilitation as their building block. One had the interpersonal caring behaviors interweaved, and the other did not. And then the control, unfortunately, was very small, but that was because everybody wanted to have something. They wanted to offer people something. But eventually, we did have a small control as well. And we used several objective assessment tools, which I won't mention, but you can find later in the paper attached. Next, please. So what happened? Let's look at self-care activities. If you look at the ICT group, they started with, runs from 1 to 4, and they started with a score of 2.65, and it increased to close to 4. And it was a significant difference compared to the non-ICT group, which also improved, and the control group just barely stayed the same. Next, please. How about interpersonal relationships? All of the groups the top two groups improved, but again, the control group stayed the same. And the ICT group was again significant at alpha of 0.01. Next, please. Self-esteem improved slightly in the control also, but it really jumped for the ICT group. And here I think it's worth looking at the baseline scores. They are very, very low, right? But they did improve over time. And this was measurement at 24 months, so 2 years later. They did do measurements at 12 months, 6, 12, 18, and then 24. Next, please. And then finally, social functioning, which also jumped in terms of scores for the ICT group. And it also increased slightly in the non-ICT group, but more significantly for the ICT. Next, please. So if you look at the scores over time, you can see that some are a little bit more spiking, like the yellow one in self-esteem that we saw. And this is in the ICT group, just over time differences. But overall, they did improve overall. Next, please. And then finally, the UNDP was really impressed with this finding. So looking at the number of readmissions and the number of days hospitalized, in the ICT group, the numbers dropped dramatically over time. So they were out, still staying in the community, functioning in the community. And even if they were hospitalized, the average number of days of their hospitalization dropped incredibly. That was also true for the psychosocial rehab group without the ICT, but you could see greater improvements for the ICT group and very little change in the control group. Next, please. So, applying the interpersonal caring concepts, let's take a look at each one of them. Next, please. As you heard, this interpersonal caring was developed with people with SMI, severe or serious mental illness, but it wasn't just applicable to those with mental health issues. It has been applied to people receiving or needing hospice care, end-of-life care, with slightly different variables. And this is Kim Hee-young's analysis. She's also here at the conference this year with us, but it has been applied in Korea to nurses, nursing students, ordinary college students, widows, administrative workers, North Korean defectors who live in isolation in Korea, vulnerable adolescents with health issues, and even elementary school children, like who have experienced bullying and that kind of thing. So it has been widely applied, and we found it to be pretty flexible. And maybe that's the beauty of it being so loose, in a sense, that each concept may feel very familiar. It's not anything dramatically new under the sun, but at the same time, it does give you a framework of how to start and use it. And we will start with noticing. Next, please. So, noticing is the act of recognizing by taking interest. It's acknowledging the other person, their characteristics, their status, their situation and feelings, and also daring to find out and inviting the other person to share their interests, desires, and needs. If you see an Avatar, the movie, you may be familiar with the expression, I see you. It's not just visible, acuity, right? It's not 20/20 vision. It's really understanding and seeing what that person is about. The patients who talked about noticing expressed things like, when I felt noticed, I felt good about myself. I had a sense of thankfulness bubbling up. It bolstered my self-esteem, and I felt like an important person. For noticing, next please, I want to spend a little bit more time because this is the starting point of interpersonal caring. What do we mean by noticing? Again, we said it's recognizing the other person, and it's taking interest and intentionally finding out more. So inviting that person to talk more about their mood, their interests, their wishes. It's also being observant, so it's not just using your ears, it's using your observational skills. Any change in appearance, like recognizing if somebody had a haircut, or if they look a little bit depressed, or maybe a little bit fatigued, responding to their situations, and responding with kindness and making an effort. It's not ignoring or overglassing or disinterest, and not being too cautious. It's good to have to be relatively cautious, but not being overly polite, but being able to interact within that personal space. Next, please. So when you try to practice noticing, you can consider these words: special care, remembering, approaching, caring for, answering to, welcoming, gazing at, knowing, visiting, does not ignore, not scoffing, looking at me, recognizing, filling my empty areas, and not turning away, thoughtfully helping me, and greeting me eagerly. So now I want you to stop again briefly and speak to the person next to you. When you came to this conference the first day, was there somebody who really noticed you? Or maybe let's just go beyond this conference. Who in your life do you remember as somebody who really noticed you and encouraged you and considered you as you are? There's sure to be at least one person, right? Yeah. Maybe you can share briefly who that person was and how that made you feel. Next, please. Thank you for sharing. I think if we talk about important people in our lives who noticed us and encouraged us, we could go on and on forever. And I'm sure that each of you are that person to so many people. How did it make you feel? It made you feel good, right? It made you feel recognized, that you're unique and that you're different, that you're worthy. Oftentimes we can describe a person using analogies or metaphors that like Jacob did in the Bible. He used metaphors of you're like a spring, a well, a spring in the desert. He used metaphors of, in the Bible we find metaphors, you're like a tree planted by the waterside. So those kind of metaphors can be used for noticing to really signify the depth of what we think about them. As we know, next please. Next, yes. So it makes you feel good and it boosts your self-esteem. With that self-esteem, we can have more vigor and strength and motivation. And then with that motivation, that person who is noticed can find the potential to change. And with that change, further their exploration of their potentials. Next, please. So how are these skills applied in the program? There was a lot of one-to-one exercise, role play, demonstration of noticing. Sometimes it's like a guessing game, but you must be hungry, imagining what that person had come through that day, had gone through that day. Or would you like to have something, offering that person an invitation to talk more? There were also one-to-one, direct questioning. How do you want me to notice you when you come home? Or how would you like me to notice you when you're struggling with your homework? That kind of thing. So it was applied to different situations, and people would do role plays and then correct each other through feedback. Presentations. After the person practiced noticing, the recipient on the other end would try to express their feelings. I feel like you're getting close, but not quite, or I feel like you really hit the nail. You really understood where I'm coming from. So they were able to talk about their feelings specifically. And what did you learn? I learned how to greet, not only with talk, but maybe a personal touch, like a touch on the shoulder, was oftentimes. So noticing is not just about words, but it's about your attitude, and the way that you present yourself empathetically. And again, all of these were done with role play. Next, please. Another part of noticing was journaling, which was strongly encouraged. So there are several examples. And we've often heard about or gratitude journals or that kind of thing. It's similar to that. It's a practice of writing it out, but write the 5 things I did today very specifically with that person in mind, and write 3 things that I'm grateful for in my relationship or my efforts to form a relationship with that person. And then, did I practice the 4 F's of noticing, or what did I do? Did I maintain that my first priority is to place that person in God's care, not going too far, over worrying, not stepping back too cautiously in anxiety, but recognizing that God will know and God will prevail. The next one is fellowship, so reading the Word of God, singing hymns, especially that was popular for many of the faith-based volunteers. Prayer. We all know adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication as the basic components of our prayer. Susie Kim was also a person of prayer. Earlier I shared that there's this disclaimer that she was my mom, but every morning at 4 a.m. she would get up and pray on the couch. And I'd often seen her do that. So the next F is follow His word. So although she didn't bring up Bible verses to link to each interpersonal caring concept, but I believe that the way that she grounded her faith was trying to follow God's word. And they're ingrained in the concepts. And then finally, the fruits of the Spirit. If you felt that you were being called to practice a particular fruit of the Spirit for that day, it was encouraged to be journaled. And the journal was a very concrete way of making people think a little bit deeper, not just conceptually in their heads, but then once they journaled it, wrote it down, recorded it, they could share it more in detail with other people. Next, please. So noticing is the number one thing that you could do in interpersonal caring with all of these techniques and training skills. The second one is participating, and we all know what that means. But here it's more about the presence of being with somebody, not just the active emotion of an activity. It's trying to reach a common goal in mind and actually being able to achieve something together. So doing something with them and making them feel not isolated, but having a shared life. Next, please. Sharing is the next one, and we know what sharing means, but this is not just feedback, it is pure sharing of myself, so emptying out myself as a nurse to the patient or the family member. So it's sharing what I have with others, it's disclosing your own thoughts, not necessarily maintaining that distance as like a therapeutic provider, but being honest about what you are feeling and thinking. And remember, those are two different things, right? We think as opinions, but we feel as human beings. We can share our plans for that patient, our hopes for that situation. We can share our worries and openly discuss it. And if we do that, if we're brave enough to be honest, the response patients said was, I feel peaceful. Oh, I didn't think about that. That gives me a new mindset. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can open up my heart to you. Maybe I can trust you. And feeling grateful and close. Next, please. Active listening, we do that a lot in nursing, and that was also another interpersonal caring behavior. And if you actively listened, the people would say they felt like a valued person, and they were grateful. Next, please. Companioning is the next one, the fifth one. It's living life towards the same direction. And again, it's presence, but on more of a long-term base. It's even experiencing life together and becoming a friend and companion. There's a famous saying that, lovers look at each other, but friends look ahead together, side by side. So companioning is more like facing the same direction on a long term. And if done well, the person would say they felt less lonely, less anxious. They don't have the right answers, but they felt less anxious. And then they felt that they could also be brave enough to muster faith on life's journey. Next, please. Complimenting is the next, and I think we need to do this more and more. We try to do it with our children and also our peers, but maybe not enough to ourselves and to our patients. But eliciting the other person's strong points, maybe it's a very matter-of-fact, obvious thing, but even so, pointing it out and recognizing them. If complimented well, sincerely, the person would feel that, oh, I also want to compliment somebody else. I feel so good about myself, and the whole world looks beautiful, and I want to do even better. Next, please. Comforting is also something that we often do in nursing. Taking sides with an empathizing attitude. And instead of defending somebody that might have caused intentionally or unintentionally some kind of hurt, just being an ally to that person, recognizing their emotions. It must have been hard, or how upset this must be for you. I can only imagine that kind of conversation, right? And treating them with gentleness and warmness. And if done well, the person who was comforted would feel that they've been really heard and they were believed in. And now that they can open up their hearts and their worries seem to be less. Next, please. Hoping. We talked a lot about hoping in the conference, even today. This is the act of helping someone to ultimately entrust everything to God. So as Christian nurses, we've been challenged to blow hope into the other person, not forcefully, but very gently, and confirming that they can do it, not because of their abilities, but because of God, who holds everything in his palms. Now they can feel that they can breathe again, and they see new possibilities. They may not have been given, again, solid, concrete answers immediately, but with the act of hoping, now they feel they can carry on. Next, please. Forgiving. This is one of the more complex concepts of interpersonal caring, and this involves not only seeking forgiveness, but also choosing to actively forgive those that I may feel have wronged me. So it's seeking mercy with a sincere heart without trying to explain. I think I often do that unknowingly with my kids. I try to explain things rationally, but no, sometimes it's just saying, I'm sorry, with a sincere heart and no excuses. But when done well, and if I ask forgiveness, somehow that also equips me to forgive. And the recipient will say that they felt unconditional acceptance or sincere humility, and that enables tension or any kind of guilt to go away. So forgiving is an important piece as well. The last one, next please, is accepting. And this is accepting that other person just as they are without critiquing. And how do you not critique? We talked about the 9 other concepts. And these are using words, but also attitudes that indicate you are really important to me, and I like you as you are. And this can, especially accepting, can be shown by hugs. And when I say hugs, the best kind of hug is not like pat, pat, pat. It's a strong bear hug, just holding that person. So I would encourage you to try that out today in the afternoon. Of course, you can pat their backs, especially if they're unfamiliar to you and it's a new situation. But we recall Virginia Satir, who is a family therapist, and remember she said that for us to survive, we need at least 8 hugs or physical touches a day. For us to, I said it the other way, we need at least 3 to survive. And I think she said we need at least 5 hugs or physical touches to be able to make it a little bit more comfortably. And for us to thrive, we need at least 8 hugs or physical touches. So accepting can be shown very well through physical actions of skinship. Next, please. So I thought 50 minutes was a long time, but we've kind of come to the end. And with this wrap-up, I want to just emphasize and share with you the essential characteristics of interpersonal caring. So it's person-to-person, of course, interaction, based on genuine love and concern. It conveys trust and hope. It transcends space, time, and culture. And it's a holistic approach that is expressed through communication, especially verbal and nonverbal communication. It boosts patient self-worth, and it allows for culturally relevant and sensitive nursing because there's so much leeway on how you can apply these concepts to the people in your community. And Christian nurses can apply the interpersonal key concepts, especially noticing, as you learn from conferences like this and apply them to your relationships with family, peers, students, and also patients. Next, please. This is my last slide. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, the theory itself was included in a book by Joyce Fitzpatrick called Conceptual Models of Nursing in a Global Perspective. Then there was a small monograph printed in Korea called, it was in English, Interpersonal Caring, but I'm afraid that's gone out of print. And so we have a few other articles for you to look at, or you can just type in interpersonal caring in PubMed. But thank you for listening, and I hope you'll be able to practice the number 1 thing. What was that? Noticing. Thank you. Noticing. Yes, thanks very much. Thank you.